Hey guys, so by request, I'm going to go over the sleeping bag today. This is the REI Flash 30-degree mummy sleeping bag. Now, what a mummy sleeping bag is a bag that's tapered, kind of like a coffin, tapered to be narrower at the foot end and wider at the shoulder end. It's going to include a hood in most cases. What makes this quilt a little special is that it uses both down and synthetic insulation. I'll show you here between my hands just how thin the synthetic insulation is on the bottom. The synthetic insulation runs all the way from underneath the foot box to the back of the very top of the bag. As you can see, the chest of the bag is going to be a little loftier. Now why would they do that? Why would they have such thin insulation and synthetic on the bottom and then have fluffy, thick, lofty down on the top? In survival knowledge, it's often said that every inch of insulation underneath you is worth 3 inches on top. So why the thin insulation on the bottom? Most modern hikers make use of what's called a sleeping pad, whether it be closed cell foam or an inflatable sleeping pad. These sleeping pads often provide plenty of insulation underneath you, and having thick insulation underneath you in the bag is often unnecessary. Another thing about the insulation on the bottom of the bag, and one of the reasons quilts like this one from Hammock Gear are getting so popular these days, is that the insulation underneath your body is compressed by your body weight. That means it's not lofted anymore, and little loft means little insulation. But even with a nice sleeping pad, you're never going to get the same warmth out of a quilt as you are with a mummy bag, and here's why. There's a snap here that allows you, with the use of a bungee cord, to fasten this around your neck and trap in more body heat. But at the end of the day, you can't get past the fact that these sides do not meet, and you're really wearing the open blanket over you. Now, quilts usually make use of a snap at the top and a bungee cord that you can draw to tighten up the fabric around your neck when you've got it over your shoulders. But at the end of the day, you just don't have that insulation wrapping completely around you. And even with a water quilt, you are going to have problems with little drafts and the edge of the quilt peeking out from underneath you. That's fine in the warmer months and often ideal. Even having a formable foot box that isn't sewn so you can open it up and just use it as a blanket is a great benefit on quilts. That's one of the reasons quilts have become so popular during the main hiking season on the big trails here in the US. You'll often hear people say, well, a quilt cuts out that unnecessary insulation and material, making it lighter and more efficient. People will also say, you don't need a hood to cover your head, you can just wear a beanie. But for the weight, there's no denying that you're going to get the most comfort and warmth out of a mummy sleeping bag. Mummy sleeping bags are so much warmer because they don't have extra space inside that your body has to waste time and effort trying to heat up. That means that your calories that you eat before bed are going to be used much more efficiently, keeping you warm throughout the night. It's undeniable that a big down hood over your head is going to be better than just wearing a beanie with a quilt. A quilt covers your shoulders, but doesn't come up and protect your neck and face and head. And you can pull the quilt over your head, but then you're going to have problems with condensation on colder nights. The way the hood on the mummy sleeping bag works is that you can tighten it up so that only your nose and mouth are sticking out on the coldest nights. You're trapping absolutely every single bit of warmth that your body's producing, and you're sealing it in here everywhere, around your neck, your cheeks, your face, and you're only wasting the smallest bit of warmth that you're breathing out. This V that's formed here, where the foot box comes out, this is an exposed edge, right? You can agree with me that there's no mechanism to tighten this bag up and secure one edge to the other. There's just no way that that's ever going to be warmer than a full-length zipper, right? And look at this. On the Flash here, we've got a full-length draft tube. A draft tube is a sewn tube filled with insulation. Here it's more down, and it's wide enough here so that when you close up the zipper, one side overlaps with the zipper about that much. That means that you're not losing any precious body heat throughout the night. Now, one problem I've had with mummy bags in the past is that I like to sleep on my side, and so my knees get a little constricted. I can't really move around as much as I like to in the bag. That is something that a lot of people complain about, and it's something that you kind of get used to. You can get a non-tapered square sleeping bag, or you can get a sleeping bag in a spoon shape that will give you more room to move your legs around and won't be as constricting. Spoon and rectangular bags, though, are always going to weigh more for how warm they are. And again, that's just because your body is having to heat up extra space inside of that bag that isn't really helping you stay warm. So what other features does this sleeping bag have that make it a good bag for the AT? Well, for one, treated down means that the down clusters that make up the insulation in this sleeping bag are going to be much more resistant to wet conditions. The reason treated down is going to be better than normal down is kind of the same reason that synthetic is better than down in wet weather. The way these insulating materials work is by giving loft and dead airspace. When it gets wet, the fluffy fibers in the down tend to collapse. Less loft means less warmth. Furthermore, untreated down can take a long time to dry out. I was coming southbound in Maine through the 100-mile wilderness, and I unfortunately got very cold and very wet one day at Antlers campsite. Thankfully, the treated down meant that I was able to hop into my sleeping bag and cook it dry with my body heat. A few hours later, I was warm and comfortable and safe. In conditions where you're really feeling the cold, maybe you're a little bit wet, maybe it's a little colder than you anticipated, you can really crank down on this sleeping bag to make it warmer. Drawstrings like these two right here are going to give you the ability to close up the top of the bag and seal in as much warmth as possible. Now, one thing this sleeping bag doesn't have, and that's probably because it's a 30-degree bag, is a shoulder collar. On colder rated sleeping bags, it's pretty common to not only have drawstrings to tighten up the face opening, but you're also going to find two pieces of fabric, and they may or may not have extra insulation inside of them, but those two pieces of fabric are going to seal around your shoulders much like the quilt does to trap in the body heat down where it needs to stay most. So while it's true that a quilt is going to be lighter and is going to cut out some unnecessary weight, you will be colder on the underside. The nice thing about a mummy sleeping bag or a sleeping bag of any kind is that you're not going to have any drafts with a well-designed sleeping bag. It doesn't matter how much I toss and turn around in this thing, it's zipped up and it's going to keep me warm. With features like the draft tube, the draft collar, and the adjustable hood, the mummy sleeping bag just can't be beat for the warmth. The REI has switched to a new model for the 30-degree sleeping bag, but it's definitely worth checking used gear sites and maybe REI Garage to see if you can pick up an old flash on a discount. If you're trying to figure out what kind of sleeping insulation you want to bring with you on the trail this season or whenever your thru hike starts, and you're going to be starting late enough in the season that you don't have to worry about the coldest temperatures, and you're going to be finishing soon enough that you don't have to worry about the cold temperatures at the end of the season, I really think a 30-degree mummy sleeping bag like this REI bag is a really good choice. For the weight, you get a lot of warmth and a lot of features that are really nice and handy, and if it gets too warm, you can always open it up and just use it as a quilt. If I had to pick one bag to use on an entire thru hike, it would be a 30-degree sleeping bag just like this mummy bag. Quilts are nice, but at the end of the day, on a long hike, you really can't beat the range, warmth, and versatility of a real mummy sleeping bag. I think you'd have to go for a significantly warmer rating on a quilt to be as warm as you would be with a mummy sleeping bag in cold weather. One thing to be careful about when you're buying a sleeping bag is that usually that rating, the EN lower limit, is going to be what they post. It's going to be a number like 48 for a quilt or 30 degrees for a sleeping bag. Now, that number is not like the ideal range usually of where you want to be with that sleeping bag. That number that you see with the rating of the sleeping bag is usually the lower limit that that bag can handle. In a mummy sleeping bag, a 30-degree rating is going to mean that you have everything buttoned up and zipped up and closed up as much as possible, maybe just the tip of your nose poking out, and then you'll be warm and comfortable at 30 degrees. Also keep in mind that you might be a cold sleeper or a hot sleeper. This is kind of a bad example, but if you haven't slept out in a sleeping bag before, think about, do you use a big thick comforter in bed, or do you use a thin sheet? Do you get hot really easily, or are you usually cold when you wake up? The reason I'm going to say that's a bad example is because your thick mattress, even if you sleep on a futon, is going to be very highly insulated compared to the pads that you're probably going to use on trail. And that's not taking into account the fact that in a house, you're already inside of an insulated, temperature-controlled house probably, and you're not really having that cold air come from underneath. When you sleep out on the trail at night, the temperature's going to drop pretty significantly, and the ground's going to be cold and try to steal a lot of body heat from you. So it's really important that you have good underside insulation. And I'm going to go over in another video my favorite insulation choices for sleeping pads. It's always a good idea to keep less weight in your pack so that you can enjoy yourself more and not have to worry about carrying a big heavy backpack up a hill. But the weight of a mummy sleeping bag isn't really so bad. And the cost of getting into backpacking can be pretty high. So why not go for an option that's going to do very well for you and is going to be pretty cheap compared to a lot of the other options you can find out there. For a good sleeping bag that you know will do well for you on trail, I'd say you probably, unless you buy used and get a deal, would want to find a sleeping bag that was anywhere between $150 and $225. I know that sounds expensive, but even the lightweight quilts, which are a little cheaper, are going to be around that range when you're ordering from cottage manufacturers online that make them. If you're interested in quilts, some better cottage manufacturers that have decent prices are going to be Lightened Equipment and Hammock Gear. If you're new, I recommend a 30-degree sleeping bag or a 20-degree quilt. One cool thing is that if you're hiking in colder temperatures later, you can always get a synthetic quilt and throw it over your down sleeping bag to add warmth and utility in cold weather. Now, I had a commenter ask if I could review this sleeping bag, and that's why I've made this video for you guys today. This isn't a piece of kit that's coming with me this summer, but it is a piece of kit that I'm going to use again in the future. Commenter said something about standing on the sleeping bag in order to show the loft in the video. to say I'm sorry, but that's not something I'm going to do. And that brings me to something I want to talk about real quick before I end the video, is protecting your insulation. Whether it be synthetic or down, it's really important that you don't keep your insulation in a stuff sack all the time for storage. Constant compression for a long period of time will definitely do damage to your synthetic insulation. Well, there's some argument over whether or not down will suffer to the same degree, but everyone agrees that it's a pretty bad idea to cram your insulation, whether it be worn or sleeping insulation, into a bag and leave it there for months on end. For those of you that are worried about packing your stuff up in stuff sacks and compression sacks for a trip, my understanding from my research is that down is pretty darn strong, and the force that's involved with compressing it in a stuff sack is not enough to permanently damage the fibers. That said, even though down is strong, anything like standing on your insulation, sitting on your insulation, or laying down on top of it on a hot night, or using it in a way that is not intended, is probably not good for the life of the product. If you take care of your down equipment, whether it be sleeping bags, parkas, whatever, it's going to last a really long time. Make sure that you only wash your sleeping bags in accordance with the care instructions on the bags. With a down sleeping bag or quilt, it's going to be recommended that you use specialized down cleaning products, which you can find online. I think Nick Wax is one that is made. I haven't bought it myself. I've always opted to just hang my stuff up and let it loft out and air out. It is true, though, that body oils can build up in the insulation and compromise its effectiveness. So eventually, you might have to wash out your sleeping bag. Look online for some articles on down care, and you're going to find a wealth of information of how to take care of your down and make it last for a really long time. Now, for synthetic insulation, it is kind of common knowledge that synthetic insulation isn't going to last as long as a down product will. So if you're looking to buy something for life, down might be the better option. Whatever you use, it's probably a good idea to have sleeping insulation that's rated for at least 10 degrees lower than the temperatures you expect to run into when you're out on your trip. The next video is going to be on sleeping pad insulation and what I've used and what's really worked well for me on the Appalachian Trail. If you think there's anything I missed, or if you want to ask a question, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video, guys. Thanks for watching.